Okay, welcome to our meeting here at Sugaraholics Anonymous. So I'm sure it comes to no surprise that America has a very big sweet tooth. I'm sure a lot of us here have it, and I'm sure you know that it's not a good thing, but you may be surprised just how much it's affecting the health of our country. So they're calling it the sugar epidemic. So almost 200 years ago, the average American every 5 days had the equivalent of 1 can of soda worth of sugar. Now, at least in 2012, almost 200 years later, that has gone up to, I can't even count that, what is that, 17 cans of sugar?
Wow.
It has exploded how much sugar we are eating now.
130 pounds a year, guys. That's
130 pounds.
It's like a whole person that we're ingesting in sugar alone.
Is that a soda or just a can of sugar?
It's added sugar.
That's just added sugars, processed sugars, like, anything added in the foods, drinks that we, especially drinks. So how much sugar do we eat? So we used to eat 5 pounds. Our grandparents ate about 5 pounds a year. We eat 150 pounds a year. 130 to 150 is the average consensus in terms of what we're eating. So you can kind of see with the graph and how it's filled in. The orange, synthetic chemicals, preservatives, artificial coloring, we would have like our big toes worth, and now about half of our body worth, right? And then the red is artificial sugar, added sugars, okay, again, about all of our toes worth versus almost half of our body worth. So it's kind of no coincidence that diabetes, cancer, obesity, and all of their related comorbidities are on the rise, right?
And on top of the 130, 150 grams of sugar, we've also added over 120 grams of artificial sweeteners. So it's not just the sugar that's gone up, it's everything else that's sweet as well.
So here's some trends, pretty cool to see. We went from 34 grams and no high fructose corn syrup in the 50s to 39 cubes of sugar and cubes. So there's 5 different, in the cubes, well, 1 cube is 4 grams, so it's about a 20 gram increase, which is about a third to a half a can of Coke increase. And then 6 teaspoons of high fructose corn syrup, which we had never had before. And that's when low fat and all that stuff started happening, right? And then today, on average, 47 sugar cubes and 10 teaspoons of high fructose corn syrup.
And as diseases go up and we learn just how toxic this stuff is in high amounts, we have pretty much every major reporting industry is telling us about it. So here in The Guardian, they say that sugar is now enemy number 1 in the Western diet. And they say that sugar is the new tobacco. And Nature even had an article saying that sugar should be regulated the same way tobacco and alcohol are.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, it has a lot of similar addictive properties, which we're going to jump into. So what exactly is sugar? Okay, sugar is the most simple carb. It's the easiest way for our body to get energy. Protein, fats take longer to digest. That's why we feel fuller longer. Sugar, we want more 10 minutes later because it's very quickly utilized by the body.
So anything that ends in ose is going to be a sugar. It's going to be a simple sugar, and we'll get into that more later.
So why do we need it though? Okay, so some sugar is good, and why? It fuels all of our body processes. Our lungs breathing air, our hearts beating blood, our brains thinking thoughts. Okay, we need sugar. It's kind of like money to our cells. It's the number 1 exchange rate. It makes ATP, energy production, cells just being able to function. Sugar's not a bad thing. Dr. Clough found a really great article about how we do need some sugar in our diet, right? And so it's not about eliminating every and all sugar because our brain needs it. It's about choosing good sugars and avoiding overeating sugar.
That might have been a bias article. It was from the Sugar Association. They didn't know there was such a thing.
So what's going down in the body when we eat it? Okay, so we eat a meal high in sugar, let's say. Blood sugar is high, so what happens? Our body's like, okay, pancreas, make insulin. Insulin is the key to the door that opens the door and lets the sugar in. So then our blood sugar goes down. We're taking blood or sugar from the blood and putting it into the cell. This is what that looks like. The door is closed. Here's the lock. Insulin comes in, unlocks the door, and then the sugar can walk right into the cell, and the cell can use the sugar. Okay, so this is under normal, healthy conditions. So we'll talk a little bit later about what happens when that lock and key stops working. So that's how it affects the body. How does it affect our brain?
Now we're wired to seek out sugar because it is necessary. We need sugar to survive and to be at our healthiest. So we're wired, our brain tells us, no, go for sugar. Now the problem is occurring because never before has sugar been so readily available and in such high quantities. That's where the problem is coming. But our brain, sugar is our brain's primary source of energy, and actually 70% of the sugar that we metabolize and we use for energy is actually being used by the brain. So there's a neurotransmitter, a chemical that's made by the brain that rewards us when we eat sugar. And it creates that sugar high, that feeling of happiness. And that's dopamine. Dopamine is that neurotransmitter. It's called the reward molecule. We get it when we do things that our brain is happy about.
When we get a promotion at work, or we eat a hot fudge sundae.
Yeah.
Either one, we're releasing dopamine, right? And so not enough of us do these happy, healthy things to produce natural dopamine, so we reach for sugar as an instant gratifier to create the same, I guess, process going on in the body.
We also get dopamine rushes from, well, hopefully not we, but use of cocaine and methamphetamines. That's the part of the brain that it targets to create that high feeling. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see they've actually done brain scans. And on the left is a normal brain. What's colored in red, those are the dopamine centers. That's showing a normal level of dopamine production. Whereas to the right of it, both with someone addicted to cocaine and obese and likely having a lot of sugar, the dopamine centers are depressed, which means just to feel normal, they need to get their fix, whether it's cocaine or sugar.
You desensitize to the point where, you're functioning at, I don't need just, it's like any other addiction, right? I don't need just one glass of wine or one cigarette anymore. Now I need a whole pack or a whole bottle. It's the same with sugar, it's the same with cocaine. And I thought that was really poignant in the corner. The two white powders, what do these two things have in common? Not only do they look similar, but they function very similar in the body. So now we're going to talk about blood sugar and glycemic index. I'm sure people have heard of glycemic index, right? Glycemic, glucose, it just basically means how much sugar is in the blood. So when something has a high glycemic index, it means it affects our blood sugar in huge ways, okay? It's metabolized quickly. It's kind of like the candy bar is high glycemic, right? It's going to affect blood sugar really high. We're going to utilize it really quickly, and then we're going to crash. Where a low glycemic index is something that has sugar but may also have protein, fat, or fiber, like an apple, right? That still has sugar in it, but it's a lower glycemic index. And so we're going to utilize that energy more consistently, and we're going to avoid that roller coaster ride, which we'll get to in a second. So what are some chronic effects of high blood sugar?
So what sugar does in the body, it has some basic effects. So when you have blood sugar, high blood sugar, the glucose is very sticky, and it causes a lot of inflammation. And so it basically kind of clutters the whole body. It can get stuck on things like, it can get stuck on vessels in the kidneys and cause damage. It can get stuck in the joints and cause pain. It can get stuck, and one of the things that happens when we talk about how diabetes progresses, it actually gets stuck to those receptors which are supposed to get into the cell. But it's very sticky, it's very inflammatory. So the entire body starts to get inflammation, and that in itself causes most diseases actually, they're finding is chronic inflammation. But if that wasn't bad enough, it also leads to central fat deposition, so in that abdominal area, kidney damage from damaging the vessels, eye damage and blindness, nerve damage to the feet, so that's why diabetics, first they'll get the numbness and tingling, and then eventually sometimes they have to get amputations because it's just too far gone. Heart disease, diabetes, cancer, 3 of the top killers today are very strongly correlated and sometimes caused by high blood sugar and sugar intake. And then you have other things, brain fog, aging skin, bloating gas and bad breath, low immune system, even mental emotional stuff. There's so many connections and things that can happen with blood sugar dysregularities, especially when it's chronically high.
So those last 4 things in particular, if you guys experience them, all of them, a couple more than one of them, chances are you have dysregulation of your blood sugar, and you really need to consider taking a look at that. So what happens when our blood sugar is too low? Or what happens when we have hypoglycemia? Anybody ever get hangry? So hungry you're angry, right? You're having hypoglycemia. That's when blood sugar falls below 70. Okay, average fasting is 80 to 100. So to go below 70, we can't function anymore. Again, like Dr. Kelly said, 70% of the glucose is used for our brain. So if we don't have good enough glucose in the bloodstream, stuff's going to start failing, starting with here. We can't think straight, answer questions, find words for things, problem solve, right? So we have, again, less glucose for the brain and other cells to use. Shakiness, dizziness, fatigue, rapid heartbeat, irritability, confusion. Those are all signs of hypoglycemia. So I think it's just as important if we're going to talk about too much sugar, talk about not enough.
Yeah, and then not only is the brain and nerves, they're not working too well because they don't have their fuel, but now your appetite goes up because now your body's like, we need to eat something. Furthermore, you get more tired and dizzy because your body wants to lay flat to get more blood to the brain to get some sugar there. And so basically we're just going to be eating more and not be as productive, gain more weight, not feel as good.
If you've ever had a long day and you're like, anything will suffice, and you just grab and go, it's probably because you were in a hypoglycemic state and your body was desperate. So, good good healthy blood sugar can sometimes require some planning, thinking ahead, having healthy snacks around, stuff like that. So this is the roller coaster. We talked about high, we talked about low. This is that pattern of the combination of both. So what happens here? We start our day out, we're kind of normal, right? And then we have our first spike, carb-heavy breakfast, caffeine with sugar and dairy in it. Maybe we skip it all together and we go straight to the low point of desperation. But either way, we're eventually getting so hungry we're going to reach for a snack to feel better. We have crashes, feeling tired, maybe depressed or fatigued. So we get desperate, we eat a snack high in sugar, it spikes it, insulin does its thing, and so on and so forth. It just is kind of this, terrible cycle that recreates itself.
So on top of the fact that you're going to be eating more often and more amounts to try to combat that low amount of blood sugar in your body, it also is going to lead to more cortisol production. Cortisol is your main stress hormone. So whenever we're stressed out, cortisol is produced to allow us to keep going. Now, if you're using all your cortisol to try to combat this sugar roller coaster, you're going to have less left over to actually deal with stressful situations. And that's when the body starts to crash. We feel more tired. Our immune system is suppressed. We start to get sick. There's a lot of things that can happen from that.
So how much sugar do we actually need? Or what do they recommend? Like, what does our brain actually need and our body really need to function on a daily basis? Not very much, believe it or not. So we look at a cube of sugar is equal to a teaspoon is equal to 1 packet. So not the crazy colored packets. I'm talking the white sugar packets or the brown sugar packets, okay? Not yellow, pink, purple, and any other color under the sun. So 1 sugar cube, again, 4 grams. So we have 3 cubes for kids. It's 12 grams to keep them functioning. For women, on average, again, average is 20, and for men is 36. Men have more muscle mass, tend to be, bigger bone, taller, things like that. So they have more structure to maintain, more cellular processes happening. They need a little bit more sugar. Now, obviously, if you're doing a lot more strenuous activity, you have a physically demanding job, or you're thinking a lot, you may need slightly more, right? But if you're sedentary, you're not doing a whole lot of problem solving, you can kind of do your job with one hand tied behind your back, you're going to need a little less sugar. Okay, so this is, again, just a snapshot of an average of what we like to see. But again, we need 5 to 9 cubes, and we're eating pounds and pounds. So just to put it into perspective there.
Pretty gross.
Yeah, right? So what's this epidemic leading to?
So our brains are off. We talked about that. Our body is basically desensitized to what normal sugar intake should be. But it's leading to some really serious diseases, specifically obesity, which is the cause of so many diseases, and then also diabetes. Type 2 is the one that's caused by eating too much sugar. Type 1 is something that happens usually in little kids. Diabetes type 2, people eat themselves into it. But then on top of that, just mood swings, energy levels, and other issues that come along with it.
Some people could even think they have psychosis. Oh, I'm so depressed, and then manic, and then depressed, and then take a look at your diet. Really. You're not psychotic. You're addicted to sugar. Bless you. So what's happening in type 2 diabetes? Again, type 1 It's called juvenile because it's usually diagnosed as children. We have gestational during pregnancy that resolves after giving birth. Then we have the type 2, which is the epidemic, what's happening. Remember the lock and key we talked about? So we have our door, our lock. Our lock is not working. The key doesn't go into the lock. The door never opens. The cells never take in the sugar. Insulin resistance happens. Our own key to the door isn't quite working right. So our body keeps trying different keys. So we produce more and more insulin to try and get that sugar out of the blood and into the cell to use. The cells are like, hey dude, I don't have sugar, so you gotta eat more. So then you wanna eat more sugar, which causes more insulin resistance, which causes your body to be more hungry. So then you eat more, and it's this vicious cycle that's occurring, causing storage, right, which leads to the obesity aspect of type 2 diabetes that we see really commonly. Okay, it also adds to a lot of the other symptoms and side effects, which we'll talk about.
And this all starts because of how sticky the glucose is. So it sticks to the receptors, it sticks to the keyhole, blocks it, now the insulin can't get in. And so it's kind of this positive feedback loop where now it gets worse and worse because the body sees all this blood sugar. Oh my God, we got to produce more insulin, but the insulin isn't working, so the blood sugar stays high. So the body makes even more insulin. And what happens is eventually the pancreatic cells, they get burnt out because they're just making so much insulin that isn't working, and now the cells start to die, and that's when the type 2 diabetes gets even worse.
And then it becomes permanent. We can't sensitize our body back. We can't reset. It's too far gone. We have to actually start injecting insulin at that point because we're not making our own, or we're making it but it's not recognized, or our pancreas is actually starting to shut down.
Mm-hmm. So your cells die then at that point when they're no longer with food?
Over years and years and years, yeah, it takes time. But so initially you have high insulin, high blood sugar. You can sensitize the body to make sure the insulin works better now, and that'll lower it. But over time, just like with any of us, if we work too hard, we're going to burn out, and that's what happens. But it takes years, generally.
Like 60 years.
40, 50, 60 years. 45 to 64 is the biggest prevalence of diabetes type 2, so it takes about that long for the body to start malfunctioning. So type 2 diabetes risk factors, if you're a family history of it, you or anyone you're genetically linked to has it. If you're sedentary, you're not working out, moving your body. If you have a really high stress life, work life, family life, you just can't seem to get out from under things all the time. That's the cortisol that he was talking about earlier, right, which is going to lead to sugar problems. If you're eating more food, you're already obese, and increasing age, the older you get, the more susceptible you are to it. Body's just not functioning at as high of a rate as when we're younger. So those are some risk factors, and here are some signs and symptoms. If you or anyone you know are experiencing these, please get checked for diabetes. Please, please. You'd be saving yourself and your loved ones a lot of trouble and pain.
So we have increased thirst, increased urination, dryness of the mouth, headaches and fatigue, significant weight loss. That's when it gets really bad. It even be weight gain initially when it's type 2. So we see weight changes and some of these other symptoms. These are the main ones when you have diabetes.
Most people are obese at the time of diagnostics. If your body has gotten to the point where 0 sugar is being used, you begin to waste.
Yeah.
Your body cannot maintain weight. And that's when it's so severe that you are at risk for a stroke, a heart attack. You need to go to the hospital immediately. And we've actually seen that happen. So again, obesity first. If it gets to the wasting or excess weight loss in almost overnight, because it happened in months, right, where he lost weight, and things like that, that's really the danger zone to look for. So here's some snapshots of diabetes.
So 30 million people, that's 1 out of every 10 people have diagnosed diabetes. And the scary thing is that only 1 in 4 of them don't know it. So all these bad things, all these other processes and damage that's happening is going on without their knowledge. And if you don't know about it, you can't address it, and then it gets really bad.
And then by the time you do address it, it could be too late. You know, like stroke, heart attack, these really serious things can happen. So what about prediabetes? Some people, there is a stage before you're full-blown diabetic, prediabetes, right? You're starting to show signs here and there, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Well, 86 million people. It was 29 before, this is 86. Okay, so about 100 million people are actually affected by prediabetes or diabetes in the United States. 9 out of 10 don't even know they have prediabetes. So please, screenings, checks, not just fasting blood glucose, but other tests. If you have questions, come up after and let us know. We'll help out.
Yeah, so 90% of the people who are on their way to diabetes don't even know it.
Diabetes prevalence among age groups, you can see that, obviously the biggest chunk is 45 to 64, which was, speaking to Gail's point, takes about that long for the body to like, hey dude, I tried to play catch up for 40 years now, I gotta tap out. I'm done. I'm sorry, but I'm done. So people are like, I'm 27, I'm 28, I eat whatever I want, I have all these problems and I'm dealing with it. But little do they know that they're just inching themselves towards something like this.
Yeah, and according to the CDC, right now we're at 1 in 10 people have diabetes. They think by 2050 it can be as high as 1 in 3. So it is just exponentially growing.
We're eating our way into the graves, guys. So insulin fat storage, what about obesity? So we know it can cause diabetes, right? Because just our body can't regulate its blood sugar. We're eating too much, too fast, to the point of desensitizing. So how does it affect us storing fat?
So we eat the sugars and the grains. They're not too good either. Things that spike the blood sugar. So we have excess blood glucose. And then what happens is we have all of this glucose is going to produce energy. We have all this energy that can be made, but we can't use all at once. So we move some of it to storage. We store it for later. And what do we store it as? Fat. And so now we have increased insulin, which that's a storage molecule, creates more fat, even more cholesterol. And now the cycle continues because at this point we've probably dropped into the hypoglycemic range. We have to eat more to catch up, but then we overshoot and we have to store it all. So it's this vicious cycle where we're trying to keep our blood sugar stable because it keeps spiking. We're storing a lot of it as fat instead of using it for our body.
So does that make sense why a lot of type 2 diabetics are obese, right? They're all interrelated. Why most people who are obese but not showing signs will develop type 2 diabetes? So this chart shows the side-by-side analysis of high fructose corn syrup intake and obesity prevalence. So can you kind of see how they're coupled, right? They work together, similar trends, parallel trends. I don't think that's really a coincidence. The more high fructose corn syrup that have been approved for our diets and our products that we're eating, again, those 12 teaspoons a year, this is really a problem. Okay, it's directly related to obesity. The first 3-year-old, the youngest person ever diagnosed with type 2 diabetes was obese, twice the normal weight of a 3-year-old. Like this epidemic, come on guys.
Yeah.
Just put the sugar down.
3 years old with type 2.
It's not that hard. And if it is, then seek help and advice. Okay, because it's killing you. It's killing us as a whole. This is how we're known to the world. American culture, fat and lazy. And sugar hungry. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't want that cultural theme put on me. Not anymore. I don't want people to be killing themselves with something they can totally control.
And one thing that's interesting about when that graph started was that's when what dietary kind of fad was starting to explode at that time.
Right around here, right?
Kind of in the 80s.
Oh, fat-free.
Low fat, fat-free. Yeah, so we're avoiding the fats, which was the bad guy. It turns out it's not so bad. That's actually one way to keep your blood sugar more stable. But what do we replace tasty fats with? Tasty sugars. And that, as you can see, has not worked out for our overall health. Our obesity has skyrocketed.
Not really helping us. So this is to put in perspective some causes of death, right? So overall, this is a snapshot of, in 2010 anyway, cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and then obesity. Okay, obesity leading to chronic disease and illness. When we have that much weight on our body, our bones don't function as well. Our heart can't pump blood to all that excess tissue. We cannot maintain that kind of weight on our bodies, right? So it leads to so many other chronic inflammatory disease processes.
Does it cause the arteries to become hard?
Hardened arteries is a lot of trans fat as well, but yeah, so what he was just talking about is storing more fat and more cholesterol, clogging arteries, right, causing plaque buildup. Plaque buildup leads to hardened arteries as well as the trans fat depositing down, making them not as easy to dilate and constrict, so that leads to the heart disease and stroke aspect of this, right? All interrelated to our diet. Everything on that graph is totally controllable. Totally controllable. None of us are victims here. It's not just like, oh yeah, I can't get rid of that last 20 pounds and I just feel crappy all day. Well, what are you doing to lead to that, and what can you do to help yourself get out of that, right? That's why we're here today. So another proportional graph that is important, disease caused globally by key health issues.
So we always hear about the physical inactivity, stop smoking, don't drink as much, but as you can see, the estimates are that the diet really takes the lion's share of the issues. And it turns out over the past 20 or 30 years, we've seen obesity skyrocket, but actually activity hasn't changed too much. We still have the same working lifestyles. And so what they're finding and what they're determining is that a lot of it's the diet, and especially the sugars. That's been the main thing that's changed. Now, there's been a lot of things that have changed, but that has really changed a lot. It's just how much sugars we're eating.
I mean, just in the last 30 years. You guys saw the graph, right, with the obesity? Just in my lifetime alone, let alone my parents and grandparents. My grandparents had a can of Coke every 5 days. We have 3 every day. The difference, why did they have less cancer? Why were they not obese? Why were they not having type 2 diabetes at the age of 3 years old? Because they weren't doing the factors that create that disease state. They just weren't doing it. So we have complete control over this. So what makes a sweetener good or bad? So we've talked about it's an epidemic. We talked about how we're killing ourselves. So how can we work ourselves out of that one foot in the grave? Is knowing the difference between good and bad. And what makes them so?
A lot of it comes to the effect on the blood sugar, as we talked about. So getting off that roller coaster ride of high blood sugar and then low blood sugar, that's a huge part of it. So eating foods or sweeteners that have a low glycemic index that we talked about, that's how much it's going to change the blood sugar. So that's one way to do it. Eating foods that won't affect the blood sugar that much. And then this can be influenced by how much fiber it has. So fiber is a type of carbohydrate just like sugar, only they're bigger, and they tend to get in the way of sugar as it's trying to rush into the body. And so the analogy is like the lights on the on-ramps, and how in the mornings and at night they go from green to red, so they stop people from going in so fast, and that allows there to be less traffic, right? Same thing, as sugar's trying to rush into the bloodstream, the fiber's kind of slowing it down, and in that way it doesn't spike.
Helps regulate it, keep it more under control.
Sugars that have low absorption, obviously if it's not getting into the blood, it's not going to spike the blood sugar, right? But also, if you have the sugar, but it also has nutrients as a balance. It's about getting the calories that aren't empty, but that are also filled with nutrients, antioxidants, and things that are going to protect against some of the negative effects of having sugar. Those are the things that you want to move towards. And also another element to consider is low fructose content. You'll probably hear about this. Basically, fructose is pretty much uncontrolled by the body, and so it tends to rush towards fat. Whereas sugar can be slowed down a little bit easier, where that it's moved towards energy to be used.
And again, fructose heading toward fat is just like with that graph. The more high fructose corn syrup we had as a population, the fatter we got, right?
Your body doesn't recognize the food, it just stores it as fat.
In terms of sugar in most cases, and fructose. The high
Yeah,
fructose.
it knows it, but it's just it's a biochemical enzyme that is affected. Don't want to
Yeah,
get
okay.
technical, but it's just fructose tends to rush towards fat because of how it is.
So bad, okay, what makes a sweetener bad? High glycemic index or really big impact on the blood sugar level that's happening, right? Too much, too fast kind of thing. High fructose content, which you just discussed, and artificial sweeteners are terrible because we'll get to it in a second, but essentially they taste sweet, so the body's like, yay, I'm getting sugar, but there's no sugar there because it's fake, so the body's like, wait a minute, now I don't have energy for my cells, I released insulin for nothing, so now we definitely need to eat now. So I just had my artificially sweetened drink, which is fine because I didn't have any calories, but you're going to eat twice as much the next meal to make up for your body thinking that you just had food when you didn't really have food, or you didn't really have something that's affecting the blood sugar the way that your brain thinks it is, because you taste sweet, it thinks it, but it's not happening in the body, right? So that's the problem with artificial sweeteners. So real quick, side by side, apple candy bar, apple, we have fiber, we have water, we have antioxidants, we have nutrients, right? Candy bar, sugar. So the difference, good, bad, does that make sense? Okay. So here are some options. Pure cane sugar, honey, maple syrup, and molasses. Those are all good because they're really close to nature. The less processing, the better they are for you. Not only that, but they help stabilize blood sugar a little bit more. They have more nutrients and effects on the body, antimicrobial, aka they fight bacteria and stuff like that, which regular table sugar and fake sweeteners don't. You want to talk about the alcohols?
So for the sugar alcohols, you've probably seen these, xylitol, erythritol. It ends with etol, that's a sugar alcohol. It's a sugar molecule with an alcohol molecule attached to it without the fun effects of the alcohol itself. So what happens is it is sweet, it's sweeter than sugar, so we taste it, but our gut can't absorb it. And so we end up just leaves our body. If you have too much of it, it can lead to gut issues because you have a whole bunch of this sugar alcohol floating in your gut. But it itself can be actually have health benefits, and it won't spike the blood sugar because it's not getting into the blood. Then you also have stevia. Stevia is a leaf that can be extracted. It's very sweet, some of the stevia components. And so they extract it and they use it as a sweetener. It's also preferred to a lot of sugars, especially your simple sugars, and definitely your artificial sweeteners, because it doesn't affect the blood sugar that much. Remember, it's all about that roller coaster ride and keeping the blood sugar as stable as you can and not getting too high or too low.
And just to reiterate the bads, all the OSs in their highest form, especially fructose, high fructose things, additives in foods and packages on labels, and also the artificial sweeteners, because again, we're tricking our body. Our body thinks we're having blood sugar, we're not. It doubles our intake of food, and most people that substitute sweeteners, they still have that, I can't get rid of that last 10 pounds. Well, do you have a yellow or a pink packet every day? Could be the culprit, right?
So the tendency is to think that, well, if sugars are so bad, let's take something that's not sugar. But what happens, there's actually several things that happen. So one thing that happens is that fake artificial sweetener still stimulates your taste buds, the sweet taste buds that let us know something tastes good, stimulates them a lot and desensitizes them. Now whenever we have even a regular piece of fruit, it doesn't taste so good. So our food choices start to change. Now we have to go to something sweeter because otherwise it's not palatable. It takes a couple weeks for the taste buds to actually change back. Now on top of the taste, it's actually fooling the brain as well, because it's telling the brain something sweet's coming in, but then no calories are seen. So then hormones are produced by the brain to say, you gotta eat some more. And so what they found is actually people that have a lot of artificial sweeteners, they actually gain weight over time, their appetite goes up, because the brain is telling them, it's releasing something to say, keep eating, keep eating.
In addition to weight gain, we see a lot of side effects with fake sweeteners, right? Not only lab tests with rats, but in human studies as well. Anxiety, nausea, vomiting, rashes, headaches, fatigue, all these issues, right? Because again, when we go into any pathway and we focus on one step and we don't consider the other steps, that's when side effects happen, right? Side effects may include everything worse than the actual issue and reason you're taking the medication. It's really similar with any substitutes you're having in your diet, right? It's not that you want fat-free, sugar-free, and all this stuff free. You just want better choices. You want things that are going to feed you rather than create disease, okay? So these are just some examples of those colored packets. Headaches, anxiety, dizziness, causing bladder cancer here. We have bloating, gas, diarrhea. And then the top two are more, better options. Still, I'd rather you have organic, unprocessed cane sugar if possible, or honey, maple syrup, molasses. But if you have to reach for a packet, these aren't going to be terrible for you. But you brought up a good point about Truvia, the last talk. Just like there's no long-standing case studies, because back in '85 they're like, sweet and low is the new everything.
Yeah.
So we don't want to sit here and say Truvia is the way to go, and then in 10 years them say, otherwise. Just be cognizant of what you're putting in your body, right?
Moderation.
Yes.
So don't be using tons of packets. Just moderate it.
This was interesting, super quick. Lab rats, 1 week. 1 week, 7 days. Not 7, 10, 12, 25 years like we've all had sugar and additives. But after 1 week, just straight water and glucose, little to no change in the gut microbes or the good bacteria, right? And no glucose intolerance, or the sign that the lock isn't working, the insulin, right? So here, after 7 days, drinking water and the glucose consists of all the fake sugars, the aspartame, sucralose, stuff like that. Substantial, not just mild, substantial changes in gut flora, which means immunity and all that stuff, weight is going to be affected, and developing glucose intolerance. can no longer take sugar into the cell.
In a week.
In a week. So what's
Yeah.
happening for us who have used these color packets, who have eaten all this excess sugar for years and
Yeah.
years? What's happening in our biology right now? Just something to consider. What about fruits? Fruits are awesome. They have the nutrients, the water, the fiber, lower glycemic impact, most of them. Some of them have a higher glycemic impact, but fruits are a really great way to go for natural sugars. But obviously, like Dr. Kelly said, everything in moderation, right?
Yeah, and if you have diabetes, then you'll probably want to stray from most, if not all, sugars. But for all of us, fruit juices are going to be worse than fruits, and why is that?
It's just sugar
More
water.
concentrated, it's just sugar. There's no
Right?
fiber to slow it down. It's like the highway without the lights turning. It's just everyone's trying to rush on, and now there's traffic. So when you're having fruits, having the whole fruit is going to be better than the juice when it comes to a blood sugar and inflammation standpoint.
So great ways to stabilize blood sugar. We kind of hit on a lot of these already, so we'll just review. Fiber, the lights that regulate sugar on and off ramp, okay? High fiber foods if you're going to have sugar. Low glycemic index foods. Protein and fats which take longer to metabolize, so you stay fuller longer, okay? Combining when you're eating that. Avoid overeating. If you think you're hungry but you haven't had water in a while, chug a big glass of water and wait 20 minutes. If you're not hungry anymore, it's because you were dehydrated and you thought you were hungry. A lot of times we reach for food when we're really thirsty, so please be aware of that, okay? If it's not clear, it's probably got sugar in it. Well, with Sprite being an exception to that rule.
Unless it's tap water, then it's all the nasty stuff that's in Phoenix water.
Yeah, ideally filtered water. And eating supplements and foods that help stabilize. If you can have cinnamon in foods, that helps regulate and stabilize blood sugar. Okay, that's really great. Bitter melon, chromium, and vanadium are also micronutrients. If you have a multivitamin that has that in there, that's going to help.
It's called bitter melon. You'll get it at like an Asian market.
It's usually an Asian, like you said, Asian markets that sell it. It's not really indicative to America per se, but if you go to like exotic markets, you'll find it.
It is very bitter.
Very, very bitter. So
you want to know how to cook it. I made the mistake. I put too much in a soup and it ruined the soup. I couldn't take it in.
Most people will take it as a supplement.
Yeah.
So here's glycemic. You can kind of see low, medium, high. Let's look at the fruit and veggies. So apples, bananas, all that stuff nice and low. We have pineapple, kiwis, potatoes being in the middle, and then watermelon, dates, pumpkins, and again, white potato with no skin, fries, things like that. Those are high glycemic. And that's pretty much, think about watermelon. I mean, it's like sugar water. It's delicious and refreshing. But, that's pretty much what it constitutes, right?
And if you look at the cereals and grains, this is a big component to blood sugar, is all the breads, the pastas, and the rices that we eat. One thing that you can notice is that when you have the white rice, the whiter it is, it tends to be higher glycemic in general. So white's going to be higher than, generally, they have it brown in the same category, but white's going to be higher. So they strip away some of the fibers and the nutrients, which in itself makes it not as good of a choice, but also now your blood sugar is going to spike more.
And the reason under breads they say gluten-free bread is higher in glycemic index is because gluten is the protein that's in bread, and again, protein takes longer to digest, so if bread has that protein present, it's going to be a lower index on the glycemic. But without gluten, it tends to be potato and rice starch, which are all high glycemic foods.
So sponge cake, is that like angel?
Yeah. Biscuits, that's interesting. Okay, so getting off the blood sugar roller coaster, here's what happens when you routinely consume lots of carbs. We kind of went through that already. It's a vicious cycle. So first and foremost, search for hidden areas of sugar. God, my brain is not functioning. I'm probably low glycemic right now. I could use a snack. So here are sources of added sugar. A lot hides in what we drink. I didn't have a lot of sugar today, but how many sodas, how many Powerades, how many Gatorades, how many teas, how many bottled things did you have?
Energy drinks, they'll have sometimes up to 60 grams of sugar, as we talked about, depending on whether you're male or female. That's 2 or 3 days worth for the entire days.
Sauces, dipping sauces, barbecue, tomato, ketchup, dressings. You can have a great, huge plate of broccoli and quinoa and be like, I'm eating healthy, and then douse it. But I added a sauce. You just kind of threw that all out the window, right? Because 10 grams of sugar for 2 tablespoons of ketchup. you're at halfway mark already.
Yeah, that happens
Alone.
with the salad dressings a lot. You have such a healthy salad and then ruin it with what goes on
Dump
top.
fat and sugar on it. Right? So this is just a quick example pulling back into the label reading that we did last month. 65 grams in a can or a bottle.
20-ounce bottle.
So that's enough for 3 days.
Wow.
And you've probably seen what people walk out of the quick trip with,
Oh, like
how
those
big
big
that
bottles?
is. 50, 40, 60.
And unfortunately, most people tend to, you can tell, the people walking out with that have the body to match the epidemic, right? They're probably,
What's happening? Yeah.
yeah, like that's, you're watching biology take place as they're walking out of Quick Trip with that drink in their hand.
You see it here.
Yes.
Minnesota,
But
they
that's
bring
based
in
on
their
a Coke.
Yeah.
But it's diet.
But
Right,
is
yeah.
that Mountain Dew one that people drink, is that worse than the Coke? Does that have more sugar?
Mountain Dew, as far as I know, has a lot more preservatives, additives, dyes, and sugar. So it's
Just
pretty,
bad all the way around.
it's a pretty bad cocktail right
Yeah.
there. It's also known to affect sperm production, but that's neither here nor there. So what you'll notice when you take out the sweeteners, you will have 3 to 5 days of the sugar blues is what I call it. A little more irritable, weird sleep stuff, maybe some sweats, maybe some, mood stuff, headaches, bloating. Stuff is changing, okay? You're detoxing. You're an addict detoxing. What happens when somebody stops using cocaine or cigarettes or alcohol, right? Same thing with sugar. We're just as addicted. It's going to affect us the same. But after we get through that hell week, this is what we can look forward to. Clearer thinking, more stable moods, more stable bowel movements and body function, less pain in our body, less headaches. All of these things are going to improve exponentially once we cut down sugar substantially, okay? So what do we do to deal with cravings? Again, if you think you're hungry, you're probably thirsty. Drink a big glass of water and wait a little bit, okay? If you're not hungry anymore, you were just thirsty and dehydrated. Not only that, but eating a snack high in protein and fat and waiting 20 minutes, okay? That's going to take a longer time to digest, right? So in essence, that's going to help curb any cravings for sugar.
And there's other things that you can do. So we have here at the bottom Gymnema tincture. This is used in Ayurvedic medicine in India. It's called the Sugar Buster. This does a few things. On top of sensitizing your body to insulin to get that sugar into the cells,
Keys working better. Sorry, go ahead.
it also will desensitize the taste buds. So what happens is it blocks the sugary, the tasty, sweetie taste buds in your mouth. So now you don't taste what everyone else is tasting when you have a piece of cake or a cookie or a brownie. And so if you go to a party or a wedding where you know you're going to be very tempted to eat that cake or whatever treat it is, you take this tincture, you swish it in your mouth for 30 to 60 seconds. That gives it time to block. You can eat that cake, but it's not going to be a cake anymore. It's not going to be what you remember to be a cake to be like. It actually, we tried it with raisins in our clinic, and it's like you're eating cardboard. It's really phenomenal. It lasts about 1 to 2 hours.
Thing that has no flavor.
And so once you do that, now it's like, why would you eat that sweetener? So this is one thing that you can do to help, stay strong during those times, but not require willpower. Just, now the
Not as
taste buds
much.
don't work anymore.
Gymnema, it's not
Any
great.
tincture is gonna be it's strong. It's an alcohol base, and so it's got that alcohol-y type of strength to it. The Gymnema itself isn't as bad as some other herbs, in my opinion, but it doesn't taste good. It's like taking a shot of, your least favorite alcohol, probably.
So yeah, and the way that tinctures are made, tinctures are just liquid forms of herbs, is most herb constituents or parts of the herb that function are absorbable by alcohol. So they're just kind of drenched in alcohol and almost like a tea bag in water, right? How it turns into tea, and now we have tea from that herb. Well, it's the same but with alcohol, and now we have the action of that herb in the alcohol liquid form, and it lasts a really long time, which is why it's an alcohol. So when you swish it around, not only is it going to taste like the plant, but it's going to taste like alcohol plant. So, but for me, it's one of those things that initially it was really challenging. I got used to it, and now I take tinctures pretty often, and they work really wonderfully for me. So there's a learning curve, but it's worth it. So final thoughts and summaries, and then we'll just review the handout and let you go. You're free. Sorry, we went a little over again. You're hardwired for sugar, okay? Your body needs it. 70% again is for brain function, so we need it. But because we're hardwired, doesn't give us like a get out of jail free card to have whatever kind we want, right? We need healthy sugars, the good versus the bad.
when you're gonna have sugars, the more nutrient dense, the better, because actually you're getting some good stuff with it. You're gonna get antioxidants. It's gonna balance out the inflammatory effects, and also take it with fiber. That way, it also at the same time, you're not gonna get this roller coaster ride. And then, if you have cravings, you have tips to utilize that. If you need more tools, that's what we're here for. But there are ways, it is a drug, it's addicting. And we're wired to go after it. So the more you can do to counteract that, you can help yourself out. It doesn't have to be a terrible process. And at the end of the day, when the sugar intake is normal, people always report feeling better. Higher energy, better mood, less cravings. It's just the body operates better.
Like I work a really long day and I still have energy for my family when I get home. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Things like
And
that is what we
exercise
start
now.
to notice. Quality of life. It's a lot of little changes that add to like a significant large change, right? You don't have to dive in all at once. So real quick on our handouts, sugar content of foods is the first page. So this is represented in cubes. You can notice one cube up here, this third little box is carrots. You go all the way down, look at the Dr. Pepper smoothie. I mean, that's like enough sugar for what, a month? 6 weeks?
The Three Musketeers is 40.
I mean, look, and
Yeah.
I also wanted you to look at the fruits. So a cup of, let's say, strawberries has 8 grams of sugar, but again, look at all those antioxidants that we're getting from the berries. Berries are great for a lot of different reasons. So those are examples of when eating sugar in combination with nutrients and other aspects of food is a good sugar. So on the next page, sneaky names for sugar, just to educate you on label reading more, knowing when something is a sugar. It may say sugar-free, you look at the pack, you see artificial. Sugar addiction, how to stop the process, what it's doing in your body. Then we did the daily recommended and the glucose chart, so you can kind of see for yourself. And Dr. Kelly made this awesome handout, healthy drinks for you guys. So if you're addicted to the sweet Gatorade-y, sugary soda how do you transition? Well, this is a great way to transition.
Especially since, as you saw in the graph, over half of the added sugars in our diets come in the form of drinks. And so, but a lot of people don't really like the taste of just plain water. There are ways to make it better, and in some cases, almost tastes like a soda. My favorite is lime water with some ice cubes, and it reminds me of when I was a kid, I loved Sprite. And so it's got the similar flavor. If you want the bubbly too, you put in some seltzer. But there's some ways to really make water come alive and much more tasty. It doesn't have to be bland and boring.
And the last but not least page is sweeteners. Preferred sweeteners we discussed with you, why we think they're good, and then sweeteners to avoid and why we think they're not so good, okay? And if you guys want anything from the presentation, it's all gonna be uploaded on the YouTube channel, so you're more than welcome to watch it, share it with people. If you know anybody who could be pre-diabetic or diabetic that you wanna help educate them more on sugar and its effects, please do, okay? Together we can totally make that graph, switch it on its head, right? Flip it upside down, and in 20 years we'll be presenting the inverse. So, does anybody have any questions? Okay, you're free.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending your lunch with us. People are loving that Gymnema.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's exciting.
It's great.